Professor, Physician, Epidemiologist. I am Dr. Sri Banerjee. Hello, I'm Dr. Sri Banerjee, core faculty for the College of Health Sciences and Public Policy at Walden University. And in this video, I'll be going over the technique and framework on how to look at geospatial maps on one account, and then on second account, what I'll be going over is looking at spatial patterns in the number one cause of mortality in the United States, which is cardiovascular disease. And then bringing it all together and trying to look for potential spatial patterns that connect cardiovascular disease with environmental health, such as particulate matter. So kind of getting started, it's important to note that if you're looking at this map, you want to ask yourself when this is from. It's not enough to just see that there's a map. You want to see what the colors represent, and etc. So the rule of thumb here is the redder the color, the higher the number of mortality in cardiovascular disease. So if you're thinking about areas where there's higher prevalence of cardiovascular mortality, the southern part of the United States has higher levels of mortality. And then thinking about areas of Nevada and then California, these are all higher levels as well. So now looking at some of the risk factors. So we'll now be looking at risk factors and then some risky behaviors. But if you look more closely in some of the areas that I've lectured on, and I've recently lectured on Uvalde County due to the unfortunate occurrence of the mass shooting that took place there. And so this is Uvalde County right here, and so this has a fairly significantly high prevalence of cardiovascular mortality. So if we zoom out now, then we can adjust our view now. Similarly, Buffalo was another area that a mass shooting took place recently, and that is also a higher area of cardiovascular disease. So as you can already see, environmental factors such as firearm use and mass shootings and violence can also trigger kind of cardiovascular disease and be associated with that. Temperatures also have been associated with cardiovascular disease, which would then explain how southern latitudes experience higher levels of cardiovascular disease. So then, if we look at, if we take a look at some of the risk factor, so diabetes and then poverty, then some of the maps kind of follow similar patterns. So over here, what I'm going to do is make the cardiovascular death rate dormant. And then now we can see the risk factor of diabetes. So let's take a look. Risk factor of diabetes. If you recall some of the same areas, we can also take a let's take a look at Uvalde County, and the San Antonio area, and a lot of these areas actually have higher rates of diabetes. Houston, Dallas, Memphis, Birmingham. So all of these cities have higher rates. And so southern cities, and those follow the patterns of cardiovascular disease as well. So this would then, on a qualitative level, you can kind of say that diabetes is connected with higher rates of cardiovascular death. So then we can move on to looking at poverty. So poverty would be considered the social environment. And are there similar patterns of poverty that we see as we see in diabetes and cardiovascular related mortality? And we do see a higher preponderance within the southern portion. The patterns might be different depending on which map you're looking at. So, in summary, looking at these three maps, I hope this has shed some light on how you can, layer by layer, take a look at numerous multiple factors and then try to see patterns which are persistent within each layer. And by doing so, you can kind of build a model to then better understand and grapple with chronic diseases. So this is one methodical approach that you can use to better understand specific chronic diseases. Thank you for listening. So in this bonus segment, this is aside from what was in the regularly recorded portion where I looked at cardiovascular disease and looking at a risk factor of diabetes. This now is looking at a fourth layer, which is having to do with particulate matter 2.5 microns. So as you may very well know, particulate matter 2.5 is a specific type of matter that will lodge into your lower lobe of your lung. So this is something that will go deep into your lungs, and this is why it can cause a lot of not only lung conditions, but as we're seeing more and more, has been connected to cardiovascular disease. So much so that there is a new field being proposed by the British Medical Journal, by scholars that have written in it, in the field of climate cardiology. There are so many studies now that are showing, that are linking increased global warming, increased fine particulate matter, all of these being associated with poor overall health, and also cardiovascular mortality. So what I did is I generated a map using ArcGIS and looked at the areas with high levels of particulate matter. And so it's always good to know what the units are. And so the units here are micrograms per cubic meter. And what you're seeing here is that anything greater than 9 micrograms per cubic meter is light blue. Anything less than 6 micrograms per cubic meter is dark blue. So anywhere you see light blue, and it's pretty much all over these areas, the southern part, and then into Appalachia, and some of the mountainous regions are not as polluted, but then Pennsylvania, all of Pennsylvania, everywhere that is all populated, it is all polluted with fine particulate matter. And what you can do is you can look in your local area, in your state, in your region, and just kind of see how your local area actually fares in comparison to all of the other areas around you. And you can see the ranking of your county. And what I actually can do is configure these charts so that it can show the specific fine particulate matter value. So I'll do that right now. So right here in the attribute expressions, there's text. And we can go into the text and then modify this. And this is something using something called latex language, which I've lectured on in another video tutorial. But this can really show some sort of ranking, and in our case we're looking for the particulate matter. So what we can do, we can just search this actually. An average daily density of fine particulate matter in micrograms per cubic meter. So I'm just going to label this average daily fine particulate matter. Then hit OK, and now there you have it. So now I can see that in Blount County, Tennessee, the fine particulate matter is 8.6. You can see in Lancaster County, average fine particulate matter is 11.4, which is higher than Blount County. If you look in neighboring counties, from Lancaster to Reading, Reading is 11.3, so that's very similar to the 11.4, which makes sense because it's neighboring counties. Now I would expect Harrisburg to not have as much. Let's see if my hunch is correct. And my hunch is correct. So Dauphin County, the fine particulate matter is actually lower than Lancaster County. Even though it's a bigger city, even has an international airport. And this might be because there's more mountains, and there seems to be more open areas there. But it's interesting to look at the reasons. So just going through here and taking a look at some of these mountainous regions, the daily fine particulate matter actually is a lot less, 9.6. So I would encourage you to kind of similar to the approach that I took in exploring these different areas and seeing the different fine particulate matter, and then going back to the original cardiovascular disease map and comparing the cardiovascular disease mortality map. And we can kind of quickly take a look at that one. And some of these regions, now Lancaster County does not have as much high cardiovascular disease mortality, but some of the surrounding regions, like Reading, Berks County, does have higher cardiovascular mortality. So there you have it. You can kind of compare all of these layers. I've shown you 4 layers, which you can then compare and provide more complete overview of all of the facets. Thank you for listening.